You may have noticed that the internet is currently in uproar all about whether milestones matter for children and who needs to really know about them. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Holly. I am a pediatric occupational therapist and a mum. I'm the founder of Playful Pod, which is my play and child development membership community. And I release new videos every single Tuesday, all about raising and supporting toddlers and their development. So if you are interested in that, click the subscribe button and that notification bell, and you will be getting toddler tips on Tuesdays. So recently, the CDC, which is based in America, the Center for Disease Control, released a new set of guidelines around milestones and milestone development. And you may have heard about it because the internet is kind of exploding with people in opposition of this. So I wanted to break down today a little bit about why milestones might matter to you as a parent, what kind of information and services you'll receive about milestones, where milestones don't help you or really fall short, and yeah, today's going to be a bit more informal, and we're just going to be really pulling up a coffee and having a discussion, because milestones are one area that is highly controversial, and there are very many points to kind of look at. And I just want to say straight off of the bat that we are looking at things from like a very zoomed out, like holistic approach. So sometimes this might not feel like it sits right for you and your family. I always say that you need to trust your intuition, and actually that's kind of the main point that we're going to get to today, that parents need to be empowered about their children's development. So if I'm talking about something and it feels like that's something that isn't relatable for your family or your child's development, just try and tune it out and find the space that is relatable. So, okay, let's start off with what are milestones. Milestones are skills that children develop at a certain age, like walking. It's a great example. It comes within a range, and it's something that children learn to do, and it's very exciting. We see them developing. Why are they important? Milestones are the outward thing that we see, the outward action or skill that speaks to us about what is going on in the inward development of a child. So we count a milestone like walking as walking, what we see, a child walking. But as a therapist, when a child is walking, I know that there's so much happening on the inside of that. There's so many other foundational skills that we know are at work in order to enable that skill. And that is really where development is happening. It's not necessarily about the walking, it's about all of the other things, like the ability to control their core muscles, the ability to initiate movement. There's so much that kind of goes far beyond what we see as just a motor milestone or a movement milestone. When we look at it and break down what's happening according to development, there's so many areas of development coming in there, like internal motivation, like sensory development, again, like core strength and like the actual composition of muscles. So milestones are just like the outward thing, the result that we see, and these have been widely studied, for centuries now, according to different populations of people, different areas, different incomes, all of this, and that's why we have a range within milestones to encompass all of those different groups. So what happened a few centuries ago in the medical system is that they noticed that there were certain patterns of children that had presented in certain ways or missed certain milestones, that when they followed them through their age groups, those children then presented with disability. So we know that some disability is clear, like Down syndrome, for example. It's something that can be actually tested for. And some disability or developmental disability or delay is not necessarily like straight, from birth really clear. And that's why the milestones and screening for milestones was established. Then what they found is that there are certain children, for example, premature babies or low birth weight babies, that are at higher risk of developing developmental delay. So they said, well, why should we wait until children are 3 and only then offer them services for their development? let's start from when they are younger, and we'll do screening. So depending on where you live, it is likely that you have some kind of screening program that you are involved in. In most places, this is actually not just about development, this is overall screening. So it might be that you go every couple of months for like a well baby visit, and here they are doing something that we would actually call more like monitoring or surveillance if your child is not high risk. So they would just be asking you some basic questions about your child's development, and probably that would be in line with also asking you, checking their weight, checking their height, just checking everything overall. Now, there's a little bit of a difference here between this kind of surveillance or monitoring that happens from somebody. It could be a nurse, it could be a doctor, a family doctor, but generally the person that's doing that kind of monitoring is not a person that is like qualified specifically in child development. They have a list and they follow the list, right? You may find, according to where you live and according to your situation, like if your child was premature or was low birth weight, that you have been put into a service which is a screening service. Now, within a screening service, and for some children, like where we live, this happens, I think, twice before your child reaches age 5, that you have screening. We have lots of surveillance, and then there's 2 like actual screening appointments. But for many people, like I'm from South Africa, I've worked in very rural contexts, most children don't actually get screening, they only get surveillance, and also a lot of children don't get surveillance. So the screening would be like a step up, and this is really where they're looking a little bit more holistically at your child's development, and they're looking more like in a more refined way at some of the milestones. And then you get another step up that, say your screening appointment has said, okay, we're a little bit concerned about your baby not sitting up, or we're a little bit concerned about your 2-year-old speaking X amount of words. So let's send you now for screening, for assessment. So assessment would be done by somebody who is skilled and trained in child development, and that would be a therapist. So I want you to just kind of like understand this level of the services that you are being provided with. Now, when I say therapist, this could be an occupational therapist, this could be a speech and language pathologist, this could be a physiotherapist, but generally, it is somebody, when we're hitting that screening point, assessment point, this is somebody who has a qualification, but also registration with a professional board for being trained in child development. So I really want you to understand those differences, because what has happened, because there is a lot of downfall within these systems, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, is that there are a lot of like adjacent kind of professions that have popped up and support parents in their journey when they haven't necessarily received these services. And some of these are good and reputable, and many are not. So I just want you to kind of know where the ladder would lead you potentially. So let's talk about where the downfall comes in. So firstly, what the CDC has kind of noted is that in that original surveillance step, which again, this is somebody who may be trained in child health and well-being, but not necessarily in child development, the approach that is often given to parents when children are not meeting those milestones is that, well, some people don't reach those milestones, so let's just wait and see. And the CDC said, well, why is this happening? And they basically decided that possibly it's because the milestones that they had presented at the surveillance level before were kind of based off of what 50% of children do, so an average. So they were finding that whoever was doing that basic surveillance level was saying, well, if it's only 50%, then let's give this child the benefit of the doubt and wait and see if they develop more. So what they've done is they've changed the guidelines so that it is now what 70% of children do. So this has actually changed some of what we would be hearing about in media about what we expect children to do. Now, it's a kind of a tricky area, because the ambition behind this is that children would then be referred to therapy more. So they're finding that children just aren't referred to therapy enough. So therapy, again, is that top level, like actually when we've reached the top of the level and we're getting assessment. And they want children to get there sooner. So they've changed the milestones so that there'll be more like follow through within the original step, within that surveillance step. Now, it's really complex. So first thing I want you to know as a parent is that while that might be what somebody in a surveillance position is saying to you about what we expect to see from your child, if your child does bump up to the screening level, the expectation or the goal that we will be working towards in therapy is way higher. For me, I find this infuriating as a parent. Now, let's lay this out, the situation out. Say you go to screening at let's say 18 months for your baby, and your child isn't speaking at all. And I'm using speech specifically, not because I'm a speech and language pathologist, I am not, but because there are specific numbers associated to this. So I think it's easier for you as a parent to kind of understand the discrepancy, whereas in motor stuff, it's a little bit harder for you to fully picture it. Again, I'm not a speech and language pathologist, so if you have any concerns about speech and language, that's who you should be seeing, not an occupational therapist. So, okay. Let's go back. So say at 18 months you go in and your child hasn't started speaking, and at a surveillance level they say that's fine. At a screening level, we would say that's not fine. We would say that what we are expecting, the standardized assessments that we are using that are highly reputable, that have been studied and restudied and evaluated according to multiple populations and multiple countries, say that we should be having 7 words at least by this age. So, okay, you're still on the screening level. So at 18 months, they say to you, don't worry, everything's fine. And you go home and you come back at 2 years, and now your child is speaking 30 words. And they say 30 words meets what our surveillance milestone says is okay, so you're fine, you can go home. If you were on the same day to go then to a clinician, to a speech and language pathologist, and they do a full assessment, because this is not just a screening, this is a full assessment where they work hard to really unpack your child's development and abilities holistically. So you would go on the same day to an assessment, and they would say, yeah, 30 words at 2 years, whereas a lot of children are already speaking 200 words at 2 years. We definitely want to start working on this. Now, this kind of brings in this other idea of do we need to race children? Why would we ever need to even work on development? And this again has been really well researched, not only in terms of speech and language development, in terms of motor development, in terms of children's balance skills, in terms of cognitive development. When children are left mildly delayed. So maybe you don't actually qualify for therapy if your child was speaking at 30 words. Now within America, and again, this is not the whole world, but this is within America, you may not qualify for early intervention, which means that your child, again, you sit in a group at daycare, for example, and your child is speaking 30 words, and their counterpart, who is the same age as them, is speaking 250 words. I just want you to think about the experience of that as a child, and then let's keep following through on how they develop when they get into school and other children are speaking so much more than them. Let's forget about whether this qualifies for services. Let's forget about all of that, and let's think as parents, this is not about rushing your children and that your children have to be exactly the same as everybody else in terms of speech. But we as parents want to do well for our children. We are considering their development, not in terms of a race or a checklist, but we're considering it in terms of how will this support them to be the person that I want to be able to allow them to be. How will this support them, not just today, but for the rest of their lives? So this is kind of the ladder that I want to give you the picture of in terms of medical services or healthcare services. But there is another like very big coin to this side to this coin, and this is really where as parents we fall into the side, and this is that the healthcare system and the schooling system are like just unbelievably far apart in terms of their approach to early childhood development. Unbelievably. So I just find it like really, really interesting that we are allowing children like this. The new guidelines in terms of screening or surveillance for development is so low. But by age 5, in a lot of countries and schooling systems, we're already expecting children to write. We're already expecting them to begin to read. And like, again, this is like so far from what actually developmental norms would dictate. So I don't know, it feels like we're setting up children for failure when we don't support their development and leave them to just like be waiting and seeing. And we're also setting up parents to be in an incredibly disempowered position, because we're saying, like my experience, and this is really why I started my business, is because as a parent, I found that the information that I received from a healthcare stance was so incredibly lacking and so incredibly poor. I won't go into too many examples here, but it was, again, infuriating as a parent to be told that things about development that just were not true, because the person that's providing that information is not trained in child development. They're trained in healthcare, and they have a screening checklist that they're following. So there's that side. And then on the other side, that within the schooling system, that again, there's like this underlying kind of belief that parents are too emotionally involved in their children's lives, that they can't have like a clear vision of what their children need in terms of learning. And again, like this completely contradicts anything that we know from research in terms of how children actually develop. So I felt so often, as in my personal experience, like I'm not talking here about my work experience, although I just have hundreds of examples of this within a work experience too, but within a personal experience, like just that every step that we take as parents, if we are the ones that are being told, like, you don't need to know about this because you're just a parent, and we need to like tell you because we are the professionals who actually often are not even like trained in child development and know nothing about our children. They see them for 15 minutes every 3 months. They know more. It just leaves us in a position where we don't have enough power to make choices, where we don't have enough power to actually understand like these really nuanced things within our children. So for me, my thought is that understanding who our unique child is in front of us is like step one in parenting, because that informs what kind of approach you're going to take to whatever you're seeing, right? So often I hear parents as well, like they come to therapy and they're saying like everything that's like going on in our lives right now around this child is behaviorally related, and they've tried a lot of behavioral approaches. But then when we come with a developmental approach and we say like, let's look at whether their developmental needs are being met, whether they're getting enough movement, whether they're getting enough opportunity to be independent, all of that. Let's see if those needs are being met, and they actually aren't. So then we can just take down the behavioral approach. On the other side, sometimes we come with a very developmental approach where actually we need to look more at our basic boundaries being established within this child's life. And once those are, then the development catches up. So as parents, we need to be able to understand this. And I'm not saying you need to get a degree in child development, parenting, behavioralism, healthcare, all of those things. I am saying you need to be the expert of your own child, and you already are. You spend more time with your child right now than any other person ever will. You are the one that sees all of the things. You know all of the details. Like sometimes as therapists, when we hear one extra little like detail, then we're like, oh, okay, so this is what it is. It's not that other thing that we thought. We need to change the approach. But you as the parent, you know all those details. You know whether they like to get in the bath or they don't like to get in the bath. You know about their transitions in and out of the house. You know that little ball on the edge of their sock irritates them to no end, and that's why you choose Crocs instead of socks, because you already know. And so many of these small details that you can't even like explain to people because there are so many. You are the expert in your own child. So what does this mean in terms of development? I'm aware that this video has gotten much longer than I normally do, but what it means in terms of understanding development is that I think as parents, it's a great place to start to have an idea of what child development milestones are. And again, I have my list of milestones, which I've based off of assessments that we do in therapy, and they're holistic, looking at like each area of development. So again, that would be like where you would see the milestones on a screening thing, not what the CDC has released, but I'll put the link for those as well, so you can have a kind of like guide for you to see, and then take your child. Often when we can understand our child's development and we can really hone in on how we can support them, we make life a lot easier. We make life a lot smoother. And again, it's not about necessarily just the milestones. It's about the holistic ability of our child that will be out in the world, just even if they're a toddler now, just in a fraction of a second, they're going to be in school and needing to do a lot of things according to systems. So for us, the more we can understand our children, the more we can understand what services we're receiving and what services we won't receive and where we need to fill in those gaps, I think the much better. There is a lot of research at the moment showing that clinicians at the second rung of the ladder, which was screening, refer to the parent's opinion and the parent's concerns or questions or the parent's feelings and intuition about what is going on in terms of their child's development. This makes total sense, right? Because I just remember my first like screening appointment that we had like as a standardized thing with my son. He was hysterical. He had eczema. He was in a bad mood. He literally just cried the whole time. So there wasn't even much that they could assess or screen. And I know that I'm not alone in that. I know as a therapist, when children come and see me, that it takes a long time before you actually see what their development actually is, because hello, they're in a new place, it's a new adult, they're doing new things. Like, that makes total sense. So your opinion, your intuition, your feelings as a parent are the gold standard, or maybe not the gold standard. Your feelings, your intuition, and your understanding of your child, your expertise in your child as a parent are the thing that often are like that change factor of whether your child is going to receive services or not. But moreover than services, your understanding of your child is the thing that's going to be with them for all of their life. And I want to make absolutely clear here that this is not to say that any kind of delay means that there's something wrong with your child. Can we just put on the table from the beginning that a milestone or a child's development is not a yardstick or a measuring stick for a parent's abilities, and it is not a yardstick or measuring stick for a child's worth. Neither of those things are true. This is something that we can use as a guide to move forward in equipping our children, but this is not something that tells us whether we or our children are good enough. You are good enough. If you haven't heard that today, you are good enough. We need to put that aside. And the very last point that I'm going to leave you with today is that I received an email recently saying that when you talk about delay, it actually promotes this idea that delay is inherently bad, and it promotes an albeit narrative that any kind of disability or delay is inherently bad or unworthy. And that is just not true. That's just not true. I come into the small little space where parents maybe aren't receiving therapy, their children don't have developmental delay, but they are seeing that they need more support, not just from a behavioral approach, not just from parenting advice, but actually from understanding why their child is a picky eater and how little things that they can do at home can support that. They want to understand more why their child that seems so smart can never sit down. They want to understand where the between space is between education and healthcare. So that's the little space that I fit into. I am so sorry if talking about delay ever makes you feel triggered, that's not the purpose at all. I really honestly and truly believe that as parents, we come in to as like a gardener to create an environment that would support the growth of our child. But of course, we need to first understand who that child is, like what the seed is. And the seed could have a disability, the seed could have a delay, and that seed is still worthy. We still are the gardeners, we still want to grow that seed. So today was long. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you feel more empowered about the services that you do receive for your child, and kind of where your role as the gardener fits in. And I will leave it at that for today. Bye, everyone.